Okay, you did it. It's finally here. It's closing day. So what should you expect to happen today if you're the seller? Closing day sounds so simple, but there are a few things that can delay or derail a closing. So here's everything you need to know to walk in to your closing prepared and to walk out paid. Let's get started. What is closing day? Closing day is the final milestone in your home sale, right? This is the moment that everything becomes official. It's the culmination of weeks of negotiations, inspections, paperwork, everything coming together in the final pivotal transaction that will take you from owning that property and transferring ownership to the other party, your buyer. Title is going to pass legally from you, and title is the evidence of ownership that's going to pass legally from you, and it's going to go to the buyer. This is when the documents are signed. Documents are going to be prepared on the seller side, documents will be prepared on the buyer side, and when all the dust is settled and everything's been finalized, everything's done, funds will get distributed and the deal will be done. So what's involved? What happens at the closing table? Let's take a look and talk about it. There are multiple people that are involved in your transaction at the closing table. You're going to have the title company or the closing attorney. We're going to have the buyer and the seller, the real estate agents that are involved, as well as the buyer's lender. These are typically the professionals that gather around a closing table as a part of that official transfer. And everybody has a slightly different role. The title company is going to be the one that they're preparing the docs. They're going to be the custodians of the funds. They're going to make sure everything gets distributed the way that it's supposed to. Buyer and seller, they obviously have the key role. They're the star players in the production of the closing. And so they have to sign, execute, do what they need to do to be able to have this transfer take place. We're going to have the real estate agents. Typically, each agent is there guiding their client. If you have two agents in the transaction, each agent is guiding their client to let them know and to help them be comfortable as to what the next steps are and whether or not everything is progressing according to the plan that they each worked out with their clients. And then, of course, there's the buyer's lender because that's the funding source. That's where the money is coming in for us to be able to close this deal and give the seller their funds and the buyers their key. As a seller, do you actually need to be at the closing? And the answer is no, you don't. Most sellers like to go to the closing because they like to be there in person. That is what's traditional. You show up, you sign at the title company's office, and I would say 90%, 95% of the closings that I attend typically happen that way, but that is not required. In some cases, if the seller is out of town, out of country, there can be what is called a mail away closing where the package is prepared, sent to them ahead of time, their documents come to them, they can sign, and then send it back so that we have it ready for the day of closing. A third option could be to execute a power of attorney where you can go ahead and give someone authorization to sign on your behalf and they'll execute those documents for you. So the short answer is no, you don't have to be there in person, but most people, given the type of transaction, the size of the dollars that are involved, will typically want to attend their closing. So what will you need to provide at closing? The first thing to be aware of is you're going to need a valid government issued ID. Driver's license, passport, anything that is issued by the government. It has to be valid. It cannot be expired. So if your license is expired or your passport is expired, neither of those things could serve as a valid government issued ID for the purposes of closing. So we are going to need that. You're going to have to be able to sign the closing documents. So either you sign them ahead of time and sent them over, or you be prepared to sign them at the closing table. The third thing to keep in mind is that you're going to need to bring to the closing all the keys, remotes, any access devices. So if you're in a gated community, any clickers or any tokens that you need to get through the gate, those need to be provided. Additionally, a lot of times people forget if there's a mailbox key, because there's a central mailbox location that should also be brought, as well as any garage door clickers, any keys for community amenities, if there's a pool key or the clubhouse has a key, all of the keys that would be needed, or all of the access tools that would be needed to take advantage of the amenities of the community, those will also need to be provided at the time of closing. And of course, if your property is in an HOA, all the dues and everything would have to be paid up. The title company will typically take care of all of that. That will be a part of the closing process that they'll take care of. But at that point, that is something that you need to keep in mind. If you have any outstanding balances, those are all going to need to be settled at the closing table so that the new owner will not have any liability left over from your ownership. Okay, so the other thing that you want to do or be prepared to do is understanding your closing statement. And I've done a video on understanding closing statements. If you want to go ahead and take a look at that, you can go ahead and do. But you want to make sure that at the closing, you're verifying your sales price. You're also looking at the mortgage payoff, which should have come from the lender to the title company. Confirm any real estate commissions that you're paying. Make sure that they're in line with what it is that you agreed to pay, as well as there's going to be a section on any taxes and any prorations. If we close in the middle of the month, then a portion of that month's HOA, if there's an association or condo dues, would be attributed to you, and the remainder of the month would be attributed to the new owner. So all of those things are going to be things that will be reflected in your closing statement. So as you're looking through the closing statement to review it, this is stuff that you should keep in mind. And then at the end of the day, of course, it'll be your bottom line. Your net proceeds is also going to be listed on the closing statement for you to take a look at and make sure that it's coming out where you expected. If there's a discrepancy, someone should be able to explain to you why there is one. So when do you actually get paid? And so that is one of the things that homeowners often ask, will I get paid at the table? A lot of times you can. So what I wanted to go through here is the order of activities that lead to the disbursement. Once the documents are signed, all the documents are signed. Typically, some of the documents have to be sent over to the lender to get authorization to fund. The lender will review documents. If there are any changes that need to be made, the title company will be notified, and all the parties at the table will make the corrections at that point. Once the lender is comfortable with the paperwork, then typically they will order funds to be released. At that point, if you're at the title company and you're getting a check, that the title company would have the option to give you your check at that point. Most title companies now encourage you to wire your proceeds, and I always encourage my clients to do the same thing. When you get a check for a large amount, it can actually be held in your bank for several days before the funds are available to you for you to use. Whereas if you get a wire, it'll go directly into your account and you will have those proceeds available right away for you to be able to take advantage of to do whatever it is that you need to do. That is particularly important if you're in a situation where you're selling a home to buy a home and you need access to those proceeds to be able to close on your home, on your new home. That is something that is important to keep in mind. Typically, if the closing takes place before 2 o'clock and we get authorization that the funds are to be released ahead of 2 o'clock, it is not unusual for you to get the wire towards the end of the same day, but certainly no later than the next day. If the closing takes place after 2, if we have a closing at 4:30 because people are at work and they can't get there to sign earlier, there's very little chance that you're going to be able to get a wire out that evening. So chances are then the next morning is when funds would be wired into your account. One precaution that I give to sellers is when you are at the closing table, be sure to confirm the wire instructions that the title company has for you. Most title companies now, with the amount of wire fraud that we have in our market, most title companies are encouraging you to come to the closing table and verify your wire instructions. They'll have something that you can fill in with your routing number and your bank account number so that they can be face to face with you when you give them instructions as to where you want your funds to go. That is probably the safest way, because there have been numerous incidents of emails getting intercepted, information changed, and the wrong information being routed back to the title company. And once the wire has been sent, it's really virtually impossible to get it back. Just make sure that at the closing table you're either confirming your wiring instructions or you are providing it in person, and you make sure that the information they have is accurate so that the money will come to you. Now, there are some things that could potentially delay your closing, and one of the things is if the buyer's loan is not finalized. That is usually the most frequent cause for delays. The buyer's package is not ready. The title company either has not received a package for the lender, or there is some last minute hiccup that takes place with the buyer's documentation at the point just before closing or even at the table. So that is something that can hold up a closing. If there are title issues, again, title issues typically, even with the buyer doc issues, those typically are found out ahead of time. You're not usually at the closing table when we discover that, but that can hold up your closing. Missing documents, if you have any unsigned forms, or if the buyer, you're buying in an HOA and the buyer did not bring the HOA approval, or there's incomplete information on either side, that could potentially hold up the closing. And of course, as far as funding, this won't delay the closing, but it will delay you receiving your funds if the closing is taking place later in the course of the day and it's after the time that wires can be initiated. That could delay the receipt of your proceeds. Now, one of the things that I share with folks is that despite the best of intentions, things can go wrong and there can be delays. So just make sure that you don't have your schedule too tightly packed. Make sure that you have a plan a plan B, if you will, that you can implement in the event that there is a delay in the closing. You don't want to be in a situation where your stuff is on a truck waiting for the proceeds to be able to go somewhere, and then all of a sudden we have an issue where we're not able to close or we're not able to fund that day. You want to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room as much as possible. Of course, everyone will do what they need to do to try to make sure that this goes in a timely manner, but you never know, things can happen. So please try to make sure that you have a contingency and a plan B. So the final walkthrough, what to expect. Typically the buyer will ask to do a walkthrough within 24 hours of closing. That they come by, they're looking to make sure that the property is in the condition that it was in when they came and saw it and they wrote their offer. The property should match the contract terms. So if you didn't have any exclusions as it related to appliances or light fixtures, they need to be the ones that were there when the buyer came to look at the property. We've had instances where sellers have tried to swap out appliances without getting an exclusion on the contract, and that has caused an issue where the buyer has refused to proceed, or the buyer is asking for funds in escrow to offset the cost of replacing these items. So we want to make sure that the property matches the contract terms. Typically, unless another arrangement has been made, the property needs to be clean and it needs to be empty. Okay, sometimes some sellers think that they can close and then go back and pack up. I realize that it creates a little bit of uncertainty to pack up ahead of getting your funds and having everything closed. But at the end of the day, all your stuff should be out of the property when you leave to go to closing, because at closing you are turning over possession to the new owner in exchange for getting funds dispersed to you. So this can't be the time that you're going to go back after closing to get last minute items out, because after that, technically speaking, you're really trespassing. This is no longer your property once you're closed and everything's been turned over. You're trespassing. And I know that there's some sellers who will say, I did not get my funds yet. But the truth of the matter is, once the funds have been delivered to the title company, and it's just the title company getting you your funds from them to you, the sale is considered to be funded and the deal is basically done. right? There can be no new damage to the property. They're not expecting to go to the property to see grass that is waist high or a pool that is green because it hasn't been treated since they signed the contract. Those are non-starters, and that will typically result with either the buyer balking and not going forward with the closing, or asking for funds to be left in escrow, your funds to be left in escrow to offset any of the costs to bring the property back to condition. So in the interest of having everything work the way it's supposed to, you want to make sure that you're keeping the property up, you're keeping it in good shape, and it's in the same condition that it was in when the buyer came to look at it, unless there's a specific exclusion. Say, for example, you have a chandelier that's a family heirloom, and in the documents it said specifically that was not going to convey, that was not going to remain, then obviously you could take it down and cap the fixture or put a replacement fixture, but that would not be a surprise to the buyer. So final tips for a smooth closing. I talked about this a little bit before. Make sure you confirm the wiring instructions, because you want to make sure that the funds go to where they're supposed to. You don't want to have any problems with that. Double check your net proceeds. Just again, look at the closing statement, review it, make sure that you should have an expectation of where you think you're going to come out at the end of the day, and you want to confirm that you're more or less in line. Of course, because there are prorations and there are calculations that get done on a daily basis, you may be a little bit off, but for the most part, it should be in the ballpark where you're not off by thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars, because then potentially something was overlooked or something went wrong. And then last but not least, stay flexible on the timing, because the best cases, and with the best preparation, we can run into delays of a few hours or even a day or so. And so you want to make sure that you have a contingency plan in place, that in the event that is what happens, you're not homeless and struggling and stressing to figure out what your next steps are going to be. I hope that you found this information helpful. And if you did, please remember to like our video as well as to subscribe to our channel so you can get notified when new videos are posted. To get in touch with me for a complimentary phone consultation, please visit my website, which is simplyaskSharon.com, and there is a link that you can use to click a complimentary 15-minute phone conversation with me with no obligation and no expectations, just to get additional information. Thank you again so much for watching. I hope it was helpful. I hope it gave some clarity, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Take care until next time.